Hi, this is Ask GMBN Tech, the weekly Q&A session. Get your questions in the comments underneath. Use that hashtag Ask GMBN Tech, and we'll come back to you with some answers about stuff. First question this week is from Bob Rides. I've been a clip-in rider. I've been a clip-in rider since SPDs first came out, but recently have switched to flats for a change and to try and undo some bad habits. But now I'm kind of getting the hang of it. I'm also finding I'm getting knee ache. Any idea why? Do you know what? I've had this exact thing. Now, ironically, a lot of knee problems that cyclists complain about have come from using clip-in or clipless style pedals. And the reason for that is it can fix your knee in a position that's almost a bit unnatural. This is why it's so crucial to A, get everything set up correctly, and B, to identify the correct system to suit you. Sometimes you're going to need lateral float where basically your pedals are free to move, like time pedals have that. You might have seen us talking about those on the tech show a while back. Other times you just need a lot of float, which Crank Brothers pedals allow. Other times you can have the more fixed approach which Shimano caters for. So it really does, one system isn't necessarily the right system for the next rider. Anyhow, those systems have given some people knee ache in the past, but you would think that going to flat pedals, there's not a problem, just pedal just your foot. However, this I've got a theory about because I've suffered this recently on the e-bike, weirdly enough, is I've been running with some super sticky shoes basically and some Nukeproof, I think the Horizon pedals I'm going to say, with massive pins on it. I feel like my feet move even less on those than they do with clipless pedals. And I feel like it's almost a more unnatural movement because you're literally on, you can't adjust your feet in any way at all. Clipless pedals, you can actually move around a lot more than people think. Well, I think it's that locked in position on flat pedals that can actually hurt your knee, especially if you've come around of a turn, you slap your foot back on the pedal and it's not quite in a straight position. You end up pedaling for a while. That's going to be putting strain on I'm doing it with my wrist here, but putting strain on your knee. I reckon it could be that. Has anyone else out there had knee pain with flat pedals in particular? And if so, does anything I've just said make sense, or have you got another theory? Definitely keen to know, because I've got some left hand knee pain and I think it's very similar to what Bob Rides has had. Hope you figure it out, Bob. Next up from Leon Stoic. Can I replace 29 with 27.5-inch wheels? Technically, yeah, you can. You can just plug them in your bike. It's not like going the other way around where they might not actually fit. But you're going to potentially ruin a few things. Firstly, you're going to lower your bottom bracket height straight away, so your pedals will be much closer to the floor, which means pedaling around turns is pretty much going to be a no-go. You're going to collapse your feet all the time. You're going to have bad ground clearance. You're also effectively making your chainstay a lot longer by putting those bigger wheels in, so you're going to affect the handling on your bike. It's going to make your front end feel a bit heavier because of the length of the chainstay. But if you really want to do that, yeah, you can do that. Next up from Julius Salvador. Are Shimano 12-speed chains compatible with 12-speed drivetrains? Yes, but no. Okay, so the official line from Shimano and the official line probably from SRAM and any of those companies will be, to use our system, you need to use our chain with our cassette, etc. And I understand this. So you're going to get some people that will say, yeah, but I don't want to do that. I want to fit this chain. Yes, so a 12-speed chain will work on a 12-speed system, whatever that system is. However, it will not work quite as well. Now, I use Shimano as the example here. So their latest 12-speed system has Dynamic Chain Engagement Plus. When you look at the profile of the chain, the inner links basically protrude a lot lower than the outer links. And the reason they do this is part of their teeth profile system. Now, on the rear cassette, it's got shifting ramps and gates that are designed to pull the chain back down again. That works with those extended links on their particular chain. If you're running, say, a SRAM chain on a Shimano, yeah, it's going to work, you'll get pretty good shifting, but you won't be getting that maximised shifting that is basically the chain and cassette are designed to work together. This will be the same with SRAM, with their chain and cassette, Shimano chain and cassette, etc. Of course, you can put a 12-speed chain on, as if it's got the correct sizing, it's going to fit, but you will never have it. I hate the word optimised, but it will never be optimised for the system. That sounds like a brand manager sort of thing. I'm just telling you because I have tried this. I've used SRAM and Shimano on SRAM and Shimano, and you can use it, but it's never quite as good as using the original. There you go. That doesn't mean though you have to spend loads of money within the system. If you were, for example, you had a Shimano XT cassette, you could still fit a Dior chain. If it was a pricing thing that's bothering you, it would be the same as SRAM. You could go down for a cheaper chain with a more expensive cassette and vice versa. So don't feel like there's a pricing thing that's making you do it. They're actually trying to give you something better for this. And it wasn't much of an issue when we had less gears as well, because there was more movement available to you. Now that things, everything's crammed in with a 12 speed, they're putting loads more features on to make sure the shifting is as good as it can be. So let's not forget, with everything closer together, it becomes a little bit more important to do that. Next up, from Dale Cooper. I really struggle with getting the right gear when spinning on dirt stroke XC rides. I find more often than not I'm in a gear that's too hard, but when I change up, it's too easy. Not much, but enough to really throw out my riding. I think I'm fairly fit and ride regularly on a 32 tooth chainring with a 1x12 setup, so I'm not sure what's best in terms of gearing for me. Any advice, welcome. All right, so when you say spinning, whereabouts in a cassette are you? In the lower gears, or as in the easier gears, or in the harder gears? I say this because on a cassette, generally, up until a certain point, the gear steps are fairly similar. But on some of the bigger 12-speed cassettes, with the bigger teeth like the Shimano 51 or the SRAM 52, the steps in the gears are quite big and quite noticeable. So there is a chance that between those you'll find yourself in a gear that's too easy or too hard. Not by much, but enough to make your ride uncomfortable. So for example, in Shimano, they do a 1045 and they do a 1051. Now the gearing choices on these, from 10 up to 28, so they've got 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 21, 24, 28, they're both the same. But the 28 point, they change. So with the 45 tooth, you've got 32, 36, 40, 45. With the 51, you've got 33, 39, 45, 51. So the steps are slightly different. Other things that could affect this, of course, could be crank length, even the chainring size, positioning on where you are. It's kind of hard to say, a little bit vague because you haven't said what system you're on, you just said 1x12. That would be my thoughts on there. Chainring size is probably the biggest thing actually to settle you in terms of that gearing. Anyone else out there having problems with finding the right gearing on a 12 system there? Let us know what your solution was to get that. Keen to know. Let us know things like your crank length, chainring size, and what cassette ratio you're using out there. There used to be more ratio available, but it seems these days everyone just wants the lowest possible gear and the highest possible gear, and they'll just deal with anything in the middle. Used to be a bit more picky than that. Next up, from Echo_Raptor. I just realised what that name is. Echo's one of the raptors from Jurassic Park, Jurassic World even. I really struggle getting my drivetrain properly clean. I know this might sound funny, but I use a bike wash spray on my bike as soon as I get back from ride, and I rinse, etc. But more often than not, my chain sounds a bit gritty afterwards. Is the secret using loads of expensive products? There must be something I'm missing. PS, where I ride is quite sandy mud, so I know this makes things worse for me. Okay, so specific cleaning products, we use loads of them here on GMBN. They are expensive and you should be using them wisely on your bike. You don't want to just saturate everything and muck off and expect it to do a great job. Yes, it will cut through stuff, but it's not always the way you should just wash your bike. Now, especially in sandy conditions, the first thing you want to do is rinse everything off. If there's just sand sat in your bike and you're just going to be stirring it around with stuff, that's not good. Get as much as you can off with just good old-fashioned water. Whether you do it with bucket and a brush or a hose pipe or a jet wash if you're lucky enough to have one, it doesn't matter. Give it a proper dousing and you can visually see when most of the muck is out your drivetrain. That is the key area to make sure stuff's out, because as soon as you leave that stuff in and you put lube and stuff around it, you're creating a grinding paste. It's just going to make things worse for yourself. So the way I would wash my bike in the sandy conditions, come in, rinse everything off, give it a good old bash down, make sure it's clean. At least visually clean, then I would get to work with muck off or whatever my bike products are to clean it with. And then again, make sure it's fully rinsed out. Then I would use a water displacing spray to make sure you get all the water out of the drivetrain before putting any lubricant or anything like that near it. Kind of makes common sense. I hope that hasn't sounded like I've answered it in a weird way, but the rinse initially is the key. Before using any product. I do see people with bikes covered in mud, just putting muck off and stuff all over, and I just think you're just wasting it. You may as well just pour it on the floor, rinse it first, and then use it to do the fine cleaning. That's what it's really good at. If the mud's already going to fall off, you may as well just help it off with a bit of water first. And last question this week is from Mackenzie J. I've been trying to learn to jump for the last couple of years, and I've had more than a few terrifying moments where I feel like I'm going to go over the bars. I weigh 95 kilograms, so weight's not on my side. You're not that heavy, I'm about 92 kilos, so I get where you are. Would a coil shock make things more predictable for me? All right, so Well, for starters, let's not just talk about chucking a coil shock on a bike because it's not compatible with all bikes. I did make a video about this, that's going to be down there somewhere. So that's a separate thing. Right, so getting kicked up the arse basically when you're riding is a horrible feeling. And what most riders would do in this instance is dial on, put a load of rebound damping on, so you're making the shock really slow to extend. So yes, that will kind of help you, but then your shock's not performing as it should perform. The most common thing people get wrong when setting up shocks, and it's nothing to feel ashamed by, it's super easy to not get it quite right rather than getting it wrong as such, is just having too much sag. If your spring rate is wrong and you're sat too far into the travel, the further you are into that shock travel, the shock as it extends, your shock shaft speed is going to be messed up. Your rebound damping has to do more to control it. The deeper you go in on things that it shouldn't be, like just compressing into a jump, you shouldn't be really like bottoming out your suspension. You might want to use, like a third, or sometimes on the bigger hits even 2/3, but you don't want to be bottoming it out. If you're going to be using as much as a bottom out on the takeoff of a jump, you've got all that stored energy. It's got to go somewhere, yeah, and there's only so much damping that the shock will do. So get your spring rate sorted in the first place. If, for example, you've got a third of your available travel as sag, try setting up your bike with a quarter of the available travel as sag, and then go and start doing your base settings for compression and rebound. You get those right, and everything makes a huge difference. Now, a lot of people choose to run minimal compression damping. If your bike has adjustable four-way damping, or you can adjust the high-speed compression, that's also worth playing with. Because of the fact that if you can absorb some of that energy before it even becomes a thing, it's going to be much better when the shock returns. So shaft speed can be affected by this. So I would try that, basically. Long way around of saying that. Get your sag sorted out, then check out things like rebound. Don't just crank on rebound and hope that that's going to fix a problem that's not actually that problem. It does tend to be sag and spring rates the bigger issues. That said, with coil shocks, yeah, you could argue that a coil shock, if you get the right one set up, will do just as well, do an adequate job. The thing that you will have with coil shocks over air shocks is you can get inconsistencies with air shocks. This tends to be on massive alpine descents when things heat up and things change within the shock. The advantage of a coil shock is you've got spring, like a physical metal spring as that medium, so that will never change. It's only the damping that will change basically on the inside. So you could argue that a coil shock is more predictable in the long term and that sort of thing, but if you look at the amount of racers that are using air shocks now, I think that argument you can put it aside, and it now comes down to preference between the racers in the feel that they like. And both of which, no matter what, everyone will tell you one's better than the other. They're both excellent choices. You just have to find what is the right one for you, and also what's compatible on your bike. Coil shocks aren't always compatible because of the linear nature they have, whereas an air shock, by nature, compressing air in a confined space, very progressive. And there we go. That's the end of this week's show. Hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully I answered some of your questions. Please do get involved down there. And like I said on previous shows, you can ask questions directly to myself, to Anna, to Jonesy, to Chris on EMBN, to any of the GMBN presenters, and we'll gladly get them on here on the show with us to run through that stuff. Ask us about our bikes, ask us about our bike setups, any of that stuff. And don't forget to give us a thumbs up and click that subscribe button. Thanks a lot.